Welcome back to part 4 of our series on the history of Israel. In this episode, we'll dive into one of the most pivotal moments of the 20th century, the United Nations' historic decision to partition Palestine, the conflict that erupted in its wake, and the declaration of the State of Israel in 1948. To understand the origins of these events, we need to look back at the world immediately following World War II. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, Jewish survivors and refugees looked to Palestine as a place of hope. The British, who had governed the region since 1920, were struggling to manage tensions between Jewish and Arab communities. By 1947, violence had escalated, and Britain, exhausted and financially strained from the war, handed the problem over to the newly established United Nations. In 1947, the United Nations took up the difficult task of finding a solution. The result was the UN Partition Plan, known formally as Resolution 181. This plan proposed dividing Palestine into 2 independent states, one Jewish, one Arab, with the city of Jerusalem designated as an international zone, governed by the UN. The Jewish state would receive roughly 55% of the land, despite Jews making up about a third of the population, while the Arab state would receive 45%. To the Jewish community, this plan was a chance for a long-sought homeland, a recognition of their right to self-determination. Despite some compromises, many Jews saw it as a viable path forward. But for the Arab community, which had lived in Palestine for centuries, this was a severe blow. They viewed the partition plan as a violation of their rights and a plan that ignored the Arab majority in the region. They feared that a Jewish state would jeopardize their land, culture, and way of life. Arab leaders therefore rejected the proposal outright. With the British preparing to withdraw, tensions escalated further. Violent clashes erupted across the region as both Jewish and Arab communities prepared for what seemed to be an inevitable conflict. Jewish forces organized through groups like the Haganah, which later became the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, while Palestinian Arabs received support from neighboring Arab nations. The cities of Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa became battlegrounds, with streets marked by barricades and skirmishes. By early 1948, the violence had escalated into a full-blown civil war. One of the most notorious incidents of this period was the Deir Yassin massacre, where over 100 Palestinian villages were killed. While Jewish leaders condemned the massacre, its impact was profound. Fear spread, and waves of Palestinians fled their homes. This incident, and others like it, left an indelible mark on the Arab population, many of whom would become refugees overnight. This refugee crisis was the beginning of a deep and lasting trauma that continues to affect the region. On May 14, 1948, with the British mandate ending, David Ben-Gurion, the leader of the Jewish community, stood in Tel Aviv and declared the independence of the State of Israel. This moment represented the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old dream for the Jewish people. For the Jewish community, it was a historic triumph. Yet for Palestinians, this day is remembered as the Nakba, or catastrophe, marking the loss of their homeland and the beginning of widespread displacement. Within hours of the declaration, armies from 5 Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, launched an invasion, determined to prevent the establishment of Israel. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War was brutal and chaotic, as both sides fought for survival. The conflict tore through cities, villages, and fields, leaving destruction in its path. This first Arab-Israeli war would set the tone for decades of hostilities in the region. Amidst the fighting, a humanitarian crisis emerged. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs were displaced from their homes, creating a refugee crisis that persists to this day. Some fled the violence voluntarily, hoping to return when the conflict subsided. Others were forced out or prevented from returning by Israeli forces. These refugees settled in makeshift camps in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and the West Bank, beginning a diaspora marked by hardship and loss. By 1949, armistice agreements had been signed between Israel and its neighbors, setting Israel's borders and formally ending the war. Israel emerged with a sense of national pride and resilience, having defended its newfound independence. But the toll on both Jewish and Arab communities was immense, with wounds that would shape the political landscape of the Middle East for generations to come. For Palestinians, the conflict was a profound and painful displacement that created a lasting legacy of loss and longing. In the next episode, we'll delve into the aftermath of the war and the ripple effects that shaped the Middle East for decades to come. We'll explore how the consequences of this war laid the groundwork for future conflicts over land identity and the question of peace. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to join us on this journey through history.